The gunshot that split the air of Rico, Colorado that morning in the summer of 1882 was not meant to kill, but it sure as hell got everyone's attention. Grace Vance stood in the middle of Main Street with her father's old revolver smoking in her hand, the bullet having torn a hole clean through the hat of Marcus Weatherby, the mining foreman who had just made the mistake of putting his hands where they did not belong. "You filthy piece of trash," Grace said, her voice steady despite the fury burning in her chest. The sun beat down mercilessly on the dusty street, and a crowd was already gathering outside the saloon and general store. "I challenge you to a duel at high noon tomorrow. You will answer for what you tried to do." Marcus Weatherby stumbled backward, his face pale beneath the dust and sweat. He was a big man, thick through the shoulders, with a reputation for being handy with his fists and quick with his gun. The mining camps around Rico were full of men like him, men who thought the rules did not apply to them when it came to women without husbands or fathers to protect them. "Now hold on," Marcus said, finding his voice and his bluster. "This little filly is crazy. She tried to shoot me over nothing." "Nothing," Grace's voice rose and the crowd murmured. "You cornered me behind the assayer's office. You put your hands on me and said things no decent man would say to any woman, and when I pushed you away, you told me I should be grateful for the attention." The crowd's murmur grew louder. Grace was known in Rico as a respectable woman, 22 years old, who had come to Colorado with her father 3 years ago to open a small newspaper. When her father died of pneumonia the previous winter, she had kept the paper running herself, setting type and writing articles and selling advertisements to keep food on her table. Everyone in town knew Grace Vance, and most of them respected her. Marcus's face reddened. "She's lying." "Women always lie when they do not get what they want." "I am not lying, and I have witnesses," Grace said. She pointed to 2 men standing near the general store. "Tom Henderson and his son were loading supplies nearby. They heard you. They saw you grab me." Tom Henderson, a weathered rancher in his 50s, nodded slowly. "It is true. I heard the commotion and saw Weatherby with his hands on Miss Vance. She was fighting to get away from him." The crowd's mood shifted. Men who had been uncertain now looked at Marcus with disgust. Women whispered behind their hands, their expressions hard. Marcus saw the tide turning against him and changed tactics. "Fine. The girl wants a duel, she will get a duel, but when I kill her tomorrow, it will be legal and proper, and no one can say anything against it." "Then we are agreed," Grace said. Her heart was pounding so hard she thought everyone could hear it, but she kept her chin up and her hands steady. "High noon tomorrow in the street. Bring your gun and your courage if you have any." She turned and walked back toward her small office and living quarters above the newspaper, aware of every eye on her. Her legs felt like water, but she made it inside before they gave out. She sat down hard on the wooden chair beside her printing press and let the revolver drop onto the desk. What had she done? She knew how to shoot. Her father had taught her, insisting that any woman living in mining country needed to know how to protect herself. But shooting at targets and shooting at a man who was shooting back were 2 entirely different things. Marcus Weatherby was known as a gunfighter. He had killed at least 2 men in fair fights, maybe more. And tomorrow at noon, Grace would have to face him in the street, or she would be branded a coward and her honor would be destroyed anyway. She put her face in her hands and tried not to cry. She would not give Marcus or anyone else that satisfaction. The knock on her door came an hour later. Grace had composed herself by then, had washed her face and changed into a clean dress. She opened the door cautiously and found herself looking at a tall man in dusty trail clothes, with a worn Stetson pushed back on his head and a pair of revolvers riding low on his hips. "Miss Vance," he said. His voice was deep and quiet, with a hint of Texas in the vowels. "My name is Ryan Porter." I was in town when the situation occurred this morning. May I come in and speak with you? Grace hesitated, then stepped back to let him enter. Ryan Porter moved with an easy, confident grace, like a man who was comfortable in his own skin. He was perhaps 25 or 26, with dark hair that needed cutting and gray eyes that seemed to take in everything without judging. His face was tanned and weathered, with a strong jaw and a mouth that looked like it smiled easily, though it was not smiling now. "I do not mean to intrude," Ryan said, removing his hat, "but I wanted to make sure you understood what you are getting into tomorrow." "I know exactly what I am getting into," Grace said, more sharply than she intended. "Marcus Weatherby assaulted me. He needs to answer for that." "I agree with you," Ryan said, and his calm tone took the wind out of her anger. "What he did was wrong, and he deserves to face consequences. But Miss Vance, he is a killer. I have heard of him. He is fast and he does not have a conscience. If you face him tomorrow, he will try to kill you, and he will not lose any sleep over it." "Then, what do you suggest I do?" Grace asked. "Back down. Let him tell everyone I am a liar and a coward. Let every other man in this town think they can put their hands on me without consequences." "No," Ryan said. "I suggest you let me stand in for you." Grace stared at him. "What? I will be your champion," Ryan said. "It is an old tradition. When someone challenges another to a duel, they can name a champion to fight in their place. You challenged Weatherby. I will fight him for you." "Why would you do that?" Grace asked. "You do not even know me." Ryan was quiet for a moment, turning his hat in his hands. "I have two sisters back in Texas," he said finally. "Both of them have had to deal with men like Weatherby, men who think women are fair game. I was not there to help them. But I am here now, and I can help you." Something in his voice made Grace believe him. She studied his face, looking for signs of deception or ulterior motives, but all she saw was honest concern. "If you do this," she said slowly, "people will talk. They will say I hid behind a man." "Let them talk," Ryan said. "You stood up for yourself. You called him out in front of the whole town. No one who matters will think you are a coward. But there is no shame in accepting help when it is freely offered." Grace thought about it. She thought about standing in the street tomorrow with a gun in her hand, knowing that Marcus Weatherby wanted her dead. She thought about her father, who had raised her to be strong and independent. She thought about the newspaper and how much good she could still do if she lived through tomorrow. "All right," she said. "I accept your offer, but I want to be there tomorrow. I want to watch." "I would not have it any other way," Ryan said. He smiled then, a warm, genuine smile that lit up his whole face. "Get some rest tonight, Miss Vance. Tomorrow this will all be over." That night, Grace could not sleep. She lay in her narrow bed above the newspaper office and listened to the sounds of Rico settling down for the night. The saloons were rowdy until past midnight, with piano music and laughter and occasional shouts. Somewhere a dog barked. The wind rattled the shutters. She thought about Ryan Porter, this stranger who had offered to risk his life for her. She wondered what kind of man did such a thing. She wondered if he would survive tomorrow and what she would owe him if he did. Morning came too quickly. Grace dressed in her best dress, a deep blue cotton with tiny white flowers embroidered on the collar. If this was going to be a spectacle, she would at least look respectable. She braided her long brown hair and pinned it up, then stood in front of her small mirror and studied her reflection. She had her father's hazel eyes and her mother's stubborn chin. Her mother had died when Grace was 12, back in Missouri, and her father had never remarried. He had poured all his energy into Grace instead, teaching her to read and write and think for herself. She hoped he would be proud of her now, standing up for what was right even though she was terrified. The knock on her door came at 11:30. Ryan Porter stood there in clean clothes, his guns freshly oiled and his face calm. He looked like he was heading to church, not a gunfight. "Are you ready?" he asked. Yes, Grace said. Are you? I have done this before, Ryan said. Not exactly this, but close enough. Try not to worry. They walked together to Main Street. The whole town had turned out. Men lined both sides of the dusty street, standing in the shade of the wooden awnings. Women watched from windows and doorways. Children had been sent inside, but Grace could see their faces peeking out from behind curtains. Marcus Weatherby was already there, standing in the middle of the street with his thumbs hooked in his gun belt. He looked confident and mean, with a twist to his mouth that might have been a smile. When he saw Ryan beside Grace, his expression changed. "What is this?" Marcus demanded. "I agreed to duel with the girl, not some hired gun." "I am Miss Vance's champion," Ryan said. His voice carried clearly in the hot, still air. "I stand in her place. If you have a problem with that, you can apologize to her right now and walk away." "I am not apologizing for anything," Marcus snarled, "and I am not backing down from some drifter." "Then we have an understanding," Ryan said. He turned to Grace. "Stand over there by the general store. Stay behind the water trough." Grace nodded and moved to where he indicated. Her mouth was dry and her hands were shaking, but she kept her head high. The crowd parted to let her through, and she felt their eyes on her, judging, curious, sympathetic. Ryan and Marcus faced each other in the street. The sun was almost directly overhead, blazing down on the packed dirt and wooden buildings. Heat shimmered in the air. The town marshal, an older man named Jim Garrett, stepped forward. He looked unhappy about the whole situation, but dueling was legal in Colorado as long as both parties agreed and there were witnesses. "The rules are simple," Marshal Garrett said. "You will stand back to back. I will count to 10. You will each take 10 paces, then turn and fire. The duel continues until one man yields or is unable to continue." "Are the terms clear?" "Clear," Ryan said. "Clear," Marcus said. They stood back to back. Grace could see the tension in Ryan's shoulders, the way his hands hung loose and ready near his guns. Marcus was taller and heavier, but Ryan moved like water, fluid and controlled. "1," Marshal Garrett said. Grace's heart hammered against her ribs. "2." She realized she was holding her breath and forced herself to breathe. 3. The crowd was absolutely silent. Even the horses tied to the hitching post seemed to be holding still. 4. Ryan took his paces steadily, his boots kicking up small puffs of dust. 5. Marcus was counting under his breath, his shoulders hunched. 6. Grace gripped the edge of the water trough so hard her knuckles went white. 7. Somewhere a shutter banged in the wind. 8. Almost there, almost time. 9. Grace saw Ryan's whole body coil like a spring. 10. They both spun. Marcus was fast, his hand a blur as he drew his revolver. But Ryan was faster. His gun seemed to appear in his hand by magic, and the shot rang out before Marcus had even cleared leather. Marcus's gun went flying. He grabbed his hand with a howl of pain, blood streaming between his fingers. Ryan had shot him through the palm, disabling him without killing him. Ryan walked forward slowly, his gun still trained on Marcus. "It is over," he said. "Do you yield?" Marcus was on his knees in the dirt, cradling his injured hand. His face was twisted with pain and rage, but he knew when he was beaten. "I yield," he spat. "Then here is what is going to happen," Ryan said, his voice hard as iron. "You are going to leave Rico, today. You are going to pack your things and ride out, and you are never coming back. If I ever hear that you have touched another woman without her consent, I will find you and I will finish what we started here. Do you understand me?" Marcus nodded, his face gray. "I did not hear you," Ryan said. "I understand," Marcus said through gritted teeth. "Good." Ryan holstered his gun and turned away, dismissing Marcus like he was nothing. He walked over to Grace, who was still gripping the water trough with white knuckles. "It is over," Ryan said gently. "You are safe now." Grace found her voice. "Thank you," she said. The words felt inadequate for what he had just done, but they were all she had. "Thank you so much." "You are welcome," Ryan said. He smiled at her again, that warm smile that made her stomach flutter in a way that had nothing to do with fear. The crowd was murmuring now, talking and pointing. Marshal Garrett came over to officially declare the duel concluded, and to make sure Marcus left town as promised. Several men helped Marcus to his feet, and half carried him toward the doctor's office to get his hand bandaged before he rode out. Grace stood in the street and watched it all happen, feeling like she was in a dream. It had all happened so fast. One moment she was certain she was going to die, and the next it was over, and Ryan Porter was standing beside her like a guardian angel in dusty trail clothes. "Can I buy you dinner?" she asked impulsively. As a thank you, Ryan looked surprised, then pleased. "I would like that very much, Miss Vance." "Call me Grace," she said. "I think you have earned that right." "Grace," he repeated, and the way he said her name made her shiver despite the heat. "Call me Ryan." They went to the only decent restaurant in Rico, a small place run by a widow named Mrs. Chen who served surprisingly good food. Grace ordered pot roast and Ryan ordered steak, and they sat across from each other at a small table by the window and tried to figure out what to say. "How long have you been in Rico?" Grace asked finally, breaking the awkward silence. "I rode in 2 days ago," Ryan said. "I am on my way to California. There is ranch work there, or so I have heard." "You are a cowboy?" Grace asked. "Among other things," Ryan said. "I have worked cattle drives, done some mining, a little bit of everything. I go where the work is." "And the gunfighting?" Grace asked. "You are very good at that." Ryan's expression became guarded. "I learned young," he said. "My father was a Texas Ranger. He taught me to shoot before I could read. After he died, I spent some time as a deputy marshal in several towns. I have seen my share of trouble." "Why did you stop?" Grace asked. Ryan was quiet for a moment, looking out the window at the street where he had just shot a man. "I got tired of the violence," he said finally. "Tired of seeing good people die for no reason. I thought maybe if I moved around enough, stayed out of other people's business, I could leave that life behind." "But you did not stay out of my business," Grace pointed out. "No," Ryan agreed. He met her eyes, and there was something in his gaze that made her breath catch. "I could not. Not when I saw what he did to you. Not when I knew I could help." Their food arrived, and they ate in more comfortable silence. Grace found herself stealing glances at Ryan, noticing the way his hands moved, careful and controlled, the way he listened when she talked about the newspaper and her father and life in Rico. He asked good questions and seemed genuinely interested in her answers. "Why did your father choose Rico?" Ryan asked. "It is pretty remote." "That was exactly why," Grace said. "He wanted to be somewhere new, somewhere he could make a difference. He thought a mining town needed a good newspaper, someone to hold people accountable and report the truth." He was right. "There was a lot of corruption here when we first arrived. Mine owners cheating workers, businessmen fixing prices. My father's articles made enemies, but they also made changes." "And you have continued his work," Ryan said. "It was not a question." "I try," Grace said. "It is harder alone. Some people do not like taking a woman seriously, but I am not going to stop just because it is difficult." "I believe you," Ryan said. His smile was warm and admiring. "You are one of the bravest people I have ever met, standing up to Weatherby the way you did in front of the whole town." "That took courage." Grace felt her cheeks heat. "I did not feel brave, I felt terrified." "That is what courage is," Ryan said. "Being terrified and doing the right thing anyway." After dinner, they walked slowly back toward the newspaper office. The sun was starting to sink toward the mountains, painting the sky in shades of orange and pink. Rico looked almost beautiful in the golden light, the rough edges softened by the glow. "When are you leaving for California?" Grace asked, trying to keep her voice casual. Ryan was quiet for a long moment. "I am not sure anymore," he said. "I was thinking maybe I should stay in Rico for a while, see if there is any work here." Grace's heart leaped. "There is always work in a mining town," she said, trying not to sound too eager. "The Silver Bell mine is hiring, and the ranches around here need hands." "That is good to know," Ryan said. They had reached the door to her office. He stopped and turned to face her, his hat in his hands. "Grace, I want to be honest with you. I am staying because of you. I know we just met, but I would like to get to know you better, if that is something you would want." Grace felt like the ground had shifted beneath her feet. She had been attracted to men before, had even been courted a time or two back in Missouri before her mother died. But this feeling was different, stronger, like standing at the edge of a cliff and wanting to jump. "I would like that," she said. "I would like that very much." Ryan's face lit up with that smile she was already coming to love. "Then I will see you tomorrow," Grace agreed. She watched him walk away down the street, his silhouette dark against the sunset, and wondered what she had just gotten herself into. The next day, Ryan came by the newspaper office in the morning. Grace was setting type for the next edition, her fingers black with ink. She looked up when he knocked, and her heart did that strange fluttering thing again. "Morning," Ryan said. "I found work at the Silver Bell mine. They need someone to help with security, make sure the payroll makes it from the bank to the mine without getting robbed. It is not fancy, but it pays decent." "That is wonderful," Grace said. She wiped her hands on her apron. "Does this mean you will be staying in town, for a while at least?" Ryan said. "I found a room at the boarding house on 3rd Street. Mrs. Murphy has a room to rent, and she seems like a good sort." "She is," Grace said. "She makes excellent biscuits. If you are on her good side, she will sometimes give you extra at breakfast." They smiled at each other, and the air between them felt charged with possibility. Over the next few weeks, Ryan became a fixture in Grace's life. He would stop by the newspaper office in the evenings after his work at the mine was finished, and they would talk while Grace set type or wrote articles. He was easy to talk to, with a dry sense of humor that made her laugh and a thoughtful way of looking at things that challenged her thinking. He told her about growing up in Texas, about his father the ranger and his mother who had died when he was young. He told her about his sisters, Sarah and Margaret, who were both married now with families of their own. He told her about the places he had been, and the things he had seen, the good and the bad. Grace told him about her childhood in Missouri, about her mother's death and how it had changed her father. She told him about the decision to come west, about the first terrifying months in Rico, when everything was new and strange. She told him about the loneliness of the past winter after her father died, the nights when she had cried herself to sleep wondering if she could keep the newspaper going alone. "You are stronger than you think," Ryan said one evening as they sat on the steps outside her office, watching the stars come out over the mountains. "Your father would be proud of you." "I hope so," Grace said. She leaned against his shoulder without thinking and felt him stiffen slightly in surprise, then relax. His arm came around her shoulders, warm and solid. "He would be," Ryan said quietly. "I am sure of it." They sat like that for a long time, not speaking, just being together. Grace felt something loosening in her chest, some tight knot of grief and fear that she had been carrying alone for too long. The town began to notice their growing closeness. Mrs. Murphy at the boarding house teased Ryan about his evening disappearances. Tom Henderson, the rancher who had witnessed Marcus's assault, made approving comments when he saw them together. Even Marshall Garrett nodded benevolently when they passed him on the street, but not everyone was pleased. There was a group of miners who had been friends with Marcus Weatherby, and they muttered darkly about outsiders who thought they could come in and change things. And there was Horace Blackwell, the owner of the Silver Bell mine, who seemed to take a personal interest in Grace's newspaper that made her uncomfortable. "He keeps asking me to dinner," Grace told Ryan one evening. "I have turned him down 3 times, but he does not seem to understand the word no." Ryan's jaw tightened. "Do you want me to talk to him?" "No," Grace said quickly. "I can handle Horace. I just needed to complain about it." But Horace Blackwell was not easily discouraged. He was a wealthy man in his 40s, used to getting what he wanted. When Grace printed an article questioning the safety conditions in his mine after a cave-in injured 2 workers, Horace came to her office in a fury. "You have no right to print such lies," he shouted, slamming his hand on her desk. "I run a safe operation. Those men were careless." "I interviewed the survivors," Grace said, standing her ground. "They said the support timbers were old and needed replacing. They said they had complained to the foreman multiple times and been ignored." "They are lying to avoid taking responsibility," Horace said. His face was red and his eyes were angry. "You will print a retraction or I will sue you for libel." "Sue me then," Grace said. "I stand by my reporting." Horace leaned across the desk, his voice dropping to a menacing whisper. "You are making a mistake, Grace. A woman alone in this town needs friends, needs protection. You should think carefully about making me your enemy." "Is that a threat?" Grace asked, her voice steady even though her knees were shaking. "It is advice," Horace said, "but I suggest you take it seriously." He left, slamming the door behind him. Grace sat down hard in her chair, her hands trembling. She knew she had just made a powerful enemy, but what choice did she have? The truth was the truth. When Ryan came by that evening and she told him what had happened, his face went dark with anger. "He threatened you," Ryan said flatly. "That is not acceptable." "It is fine," Grace said. "I have dealt with angry mine owners before. Horace is all bluster." But she was wrong. 2 days later, the newspaper office was broken into during the night. Grace came down in the morning to find her printing press smashed, her carefully organized boxes of type scattered across the floor, and her files of past articles torn to pieces. The window had been broken and someone had poured ink all over everything, ruining months of work. Grace stood in the middle of the destruction and felt tears streaming down her face. This was more than she could fix alone. The printing press was expensive, probably more than she could afford to replace. Without it, she could not print the newspaper. Without the newspaper, she had no income. She was sitting on the floor surrounded by ruined papers when Ryan arrived. He took one look at the destruction and his face went hard as stone. "Horace," he said. "Probably," Grace said, "but I cannot prove it. And even if I could, what would Marshall Garrett do? Horace owns half this town." Ryan crouched down beside her and took her hands. "Listen to me," he said. "We are going to fix this. I have some money saved. We can get the press repaired or buy a used one from another town. You are not going to let him win." "Why would you spend your money on my newspaper?" Grace asked. "Because it matters," Ryan said. "Because what you do matters, and because I—" He stopped, his gray eyes searching her face. "Because I care about you, Grace, more than I have cared about anyone in a long time." Grace felt her breath catch. "Ryan." "You do not have to say anything," Ryan said quickly. "I just wanted you to know. I am here and I am not going anywhere and we are going to get through this together." Grace leaned forward and kissed him. It was impulsive and probably unwise, but she did not care. His lips were warm and he tasted like coffee and hope. He made a surprised sound, then kissed her back, his hand coming up to cup her cheek. When they finally pulled apart, they were both breathing hard. "I care about you too," Grace said, in case that was not clear. Ryan laughed, a real laugh full of joy and relief. "It is clear now." They spent the rest of the day cleaning up the office. Several townspeople stopped by when they heard what had happened, offering help and expressing outrage. Tom Henderson brought tools to fix the broken window. Mrs. Murphy brought sandwiches and lemonade. Even Marshal Garrett came by, looking troubled. "I know you cannot prove who did this," the marshal said, "but I will be keeping a closer eye on certain people from now on." It took Ryan 2 weeks to find a used printing press in a town 50 miles away. He rode there and back, arranging for it to be transported to Rico by freight wagon. The cost was considerable, and Grace insisted on paying him back, but Ryan refused. "Consider it an investment," he said, "in the newspaper and in us." The "us" made Grace's heart sing. The new press arrived and was installed in the office. It was older than the previous one and had a few quirks, but it worked. Grace printed the next edition of the newspaper with an article about the break-in, carefully worded to avoid libel but making it clear that someone wanted to silence her. The town rallied around her. People bought extra copies of the newspaper and made a point of congratulating her on the street. Several businessmen canceled their contracts with the Silver Bell mine in protest. Horace Blackwell found himself suddenly unpopular, and his attempts to court Grace became even more ridiculous. Summer turned to fall. The aspens on the mountainsides turned gold, and the air grew crisp with the promise of winter. Grace and Ryan's relationship deepened from friendship to something more. They were careful about propriety, both aware that the town was watching, but everyone could see they were courting. Ryan asked her to the harvest dance in October, and Grace said yes. She wore her best dress, a green silk that had been her mother's, and Ryan showed up in clean clothes with his hair slicked back and looking almost nervous. "You look beautiful," he said when he saw her. "You clean up pretty well yourself," Grace said, taking his offered arm. The dance was held in the town hall, with tables of food and a small band playing fiddle music. Grace had not been to a dance since before her father died, and she had forgotten how much fun it could be. Ryan was a good dancer, moving with the same fluid grace he showed in everything else. They danced and laughed and ate apple pie, and for a few hours Grace forgot about the newspaper and the pressure and the constant worry. She just let herself be happy. "I need to tell you something," Ryan said as they stood outside in the cool night air, taking a break from the crowded hall. "I have been thinking about the future." Grace's heart started to pound. "What about it?" "I want to stay in Rico," Ryan said. "Not just for a few months, but permanently. I want to build a life here, and I want to build that life with you if you will have me." Grace felt tears prickling her eyes, but they were happy tears this time. "Are you asking what I think you are asking?" "Not yet," Ryan said, a smile playing at his lips. "When I ask you properly, it will be romantic and memorable, and I will have a ring. This is just me making sure I am not completely crazy for hoping you might say yes when I do ask." "You are not crazy," Grace said softly. She reached up and touched his face, feeling the rough stubble on his jaw. "When you ask me properly, I am going to say yes." Ryan's smile was brilliant in the moonlight. He pulled her close and kissed her, and Grace felt like she was flying. Winter came to Rico with a vengeance. Snow piled high in the streets and the temperature dropped below zero at night. The mines kept operating, but everything else slowed down. Grace kept publishing the newspaper, though distribution was harder when the roads were blocked with snow. Ryan moved from the boarding house to a small cabin on the edge of town, insisting that he needed more space. Grace suspected he was planning something, but she did not ask. She trusted him. Christmas came, and with it a surprise. Ryan showed up at her office on Christmas Eve with a package wrapped in brown paper. "Open it," he said, his eyes dancing with excitement. Inside was a beautiful leather-bound journal with her initials embossed on the cover in gold. "For your writing," Ryan said. "I know you write articles for the newspaper, but I thought maybe you had other stories you wanted to tell." "It is perfect," Grace said, running her fingers over the smooth leather. "Thank you. There is more," Ryan said. He pulled out a smaller package from his coat pocket and knelt down on one knee. Grace's breath stopped. "Grace Vance," Ryan said, opening the small box to reveal a simple gold band with a small diamond. I know we have only known each other for 6 months, but they have been the best 6 months of my life. You are brave and smart and beautiful, and I love you more than I thought it was possible to love anyone. Will you marry me? Yes, Grace said, the word coming out as a sob of joy. Yes, absolutely yes. Ryan stood up and slipped the ring on her finger, then kissed her while snow fell gently outside the window. Grace felt like her heart might burst from happiness. They were married in February of 1883 in a small ceremony at the church in Rico. Grace wore a white dress that Mrs. Murphy and several other women in town had helped her sew, and Ryan wore a new suit that made him look almost uncomfortable. Tom Henderson walked Grace down the aisle since her father was not there to do it, and Grace tried not to cry. The church was packed with townspeople, all of them smiling and happy. Even Marshall Garrett looked pleased. The only notable absence was Horace Blackwell, who had apparently decided that if he could not have Grace, he at least did not have to watch her marry someone else. I now pronounce you husband and wife, the minister said, and Ryan kissed Grace to a chorus of cheers and applause. The reception was held at the town hall, with food and music and dancing. Grace danced with Ryan and with Tom Henderson and with Marshall Garrett, and she laughed more than she had laughed in years. This was her town, these were her people, and she was exactly where she was supposed to be. Ryan had been fixing up the cabin in secret, turning it into a real home. When he carried Grace over the threshold that evening, she gasped in surprise. There was new furniture, real curtains on the windows, and a beautiful quilt on the bed that his sisters had sent from Texas. You like it? Ryan asked, looking suddenly nervous. I love it, Grace said. I love you. That night, in the warmth of their new home with the fire crackling in the hearth, Grace and Ryan made love for the first time. It was tender and passionate and a little awkward, but it was perfect because it was them. Married life suited them both. Grace continued to run the newspaper, with Ryan helping in the evenings with the heavy lifting and distribution. Ryan kept his job at the mine, providing security and building a reputation as someone reliable and trustworthy. They settled into a comfortable routine, working hard during the day and coming home to each other at night. Spring came again, and with it new challenges. Horace Blackwell, frustrated by his loss of influence in the town and angry at Grace and Ryan's success, began spreading rumors. He claimed that Grace's newspaper was biased, that Ryan was a criminal hiding from his past, that their marriage was a sham to cover up some scandal. Most people ignored the rumors, but they still hurt. Grace found herself having to defend her journalism and her character repeatedly. Ryan, who had hoped to leave his violent past behind, found himself being goaded by Horace's men, who tried to start fights with him in the saloon. He wants you to lose your temper, Grace said one evening after Ryan came home with bruised knuckles from avoiding a fight. He wants you to shoot someone so he can have you arrested. I know, Ryan said, flexing his sore hand. I am trying to be patient, but Grace, there is only so much I can take. I know, Grace said. She thought for a moment. Maybe it is time to fight back, but not with guns, with words. Over the next week, Grace investigated Horace Blackwell's business practices more thoroughly than she ever had before. She interviewed miners who had been cheated of their wages. She talked to families of men who had died in cave-ins that Horace had covered up. She examined public records and found evidence of fraud and corruption. The article she finally printed was devastating. It laid out, in careful detail with supporting evidence, a pattern of criminal behavior spanning years. Horace Blackwell was revealed as a thief, a liar, and a man who valued profit over human life. The response was immediate. The federal marshal from Denver arrived in Rico within a week to investigate. Several miners filed lawsuits. The owners of the Silver Bell mine, who lived back east and had trusted Horace to manage their investment, fired him and hired new management. Horace tried to fight back, but the evidence was overwhelming. He was arrested and charged with fraud and manslaughter. His trial was held in Denver, and he was convicted and sentenced to 10 years in prison. Grace felt no joy in his downfall, only relief that he could not hurt anyone else. "You did a good thing," Ryan told her the night they heard about the conviction. "You made this town safer. You gave those miners justice. We did it together," Grace said. "I could not have done any of this without you." That summer, Grace discovered she was pregnant. She was nervous at first, worried about how she would manage the newspaper with a baby, but Ryan was thrilled. "We will figure it out," he said, his hand on her still flat stomach. "We always do." Their son was born in March of 1884, during a late spring snowstorm. The labor was long and difficult, but when Grace finally held her baby boy in her arms, all the pain was forgotten. He had Ryan's gray eyes and Grace's dark hair, and he was the most beautiful thing she had ever seen. They named him Thomas, after Tom Henderson, who had become like a father to both of them. Ryan proved to be a devoted father, walking the floor at night when Thomas cried and changing diapers without complaint. He built a cradle for the baby and installed it in the newspaper office, so Grace could keep working while she cared for Thomas. The town embraced the new family. Mrs. Murphy knitted tiny sweaters. Tom Henderson carved wooden toys. Even Marshall Garrett stopped by with a small silver cup engraved with Thomas's name. Grace found herself happier than she had ever imagined possible. She had her work, which she loved. She had a husband who supported her and made her laugh. She had a healthy, beautiful son. Life was good over the next few years. Their family grew. A daughter named Rose was born in 1886, with blonde hair and hazel eyes and a laugh that sounded like music. Another son, called Daniel, arrived in 1888, quieter than his siblings but with a thoughtful nature that reminded Grace of her father. The newspaper continued to thrive. Grace hired an assistant to help with the printing, a young man from Denver who was learning the trade. This gave her more time to write articles and spend with her children. Ryan was eventually promoted to manager of security for the Silver Bell mine, with a substantial increase in salary. This allowed them to buy a larger house on the outskirts of Rico, with enough room for their growing family and a real office for Grace's writing. The town of Rico changed too. More families moved in, and more businesses opened. A proper school was built, and Grace served on the school board. The rough mining camp gradually transformed into a real community, a place where people raised families and built futures. Through it all, Grace and Ryan's love deepened and grew. They had their disagreements, of course. Grace could be stubborn about her work, and Ryan sometimes worried too much about her safety. But they learned to talk through their problems, to compromise and support each other. On their 10th wedding anniversary in February of 1893, Ryan surprised Grace with a trip to Denver. They left the children with Mrs. Murphy and Tom Henderson and took the train to the city, where they stayed in a real hotel and ate at fancy restaurants and went to the theater. "I wanted to remind you what it was like when it was just us," Ryan said as they lay in the hotel bed, listening to the sounds of the city outside, before children and responsibilities and everything else. "I remember," Grace said, snuggling closer to him, "but I like our life now better. I like the chaos and the noise and coming home to 3 little faces that light up when we walk in the door." "Me too," Ryan admitted, "but it is nice to have a break sometimes." "It is," Grace agreed. She kissed him softly. "Thank you for this. Thank you for everything. For saving me that day in the street. For standing beside me. For building this life with me." "You saved me too," Ryan said. I was just drifting before I met you, going from place to place with no purpose. You gave me a reason to stay, to build something permanent. You gave me a home." They made love slowly, tenderly, reconnecting in a way that was harder to do when three children were likely to burst into their bedroom at any moment. When they returned to Rico, their children greeted them with wild enthusiasm. Thomas, now 9 years old, had been taking his role as oldest sibling very seriously. Rose, at 7, chattered non-stop about everything they had done while their parents were gone. And Daniel, 5 years old and missing his 2 front teeth, just wrapped himself around Grace's legs and refused to let go. "I think they missed us," Ryan said dryly, trying to extract Daniel so Grace could walk. "Just a little," Grace agreed, her heart full. The years continued to pass, marked by the ordinary milestones of family life. Thomas graduated from the Rico school at the top of his class and announced he wanted to be a journalist like his mother. Rose discovered a talent for drawing and spent hours sketching the mountains and wildlife around their home. Daniel, quiet and observant, revealed a gift for numbers and helped Ryan with the mine's accounts. Grace continued to publish the newspaper, though she had handed over much of the day-to-day operations to her assistant. She focused on longer, more investigative pieces, and her articles were sometimes reprinted in papers as far away as Denver and San Francisco. Ryan, now in his 40s but still strong and capable, had become one of the most respected men in Rico. He served on the town council and helped mediate disputes. He was known for his fairness and his calm in crisis. Their marriage remained strong. They still made time for each other, still talked late into the night about their dreams and worries. They still held hands when they walked down Main Street, earning indulgent smiles from the townspeople who remembered when they were newlyweds. In the summer of 1895, Grace received a letter from a publisher in New York. They had read her articles and wanted to know if she had ever considered writing a book about her experiences in Rico, about building a life in a mining town and fighting for truth in journalism. Grace was tempted. It would be an honor to be published by a major New York house, but it would also mean spending months focused on writing instead of her family and the newspaper. "What do you think?" she asked Ryan, showing him the letter. Ryan read it carefully. "I think you should do it," he said. "This is a wonderful opportunity, and the children are old enough now that they do not need you every minute. Thomas is 17, Rose is 15, and Daniel is 13. They can help more around the house." "But the newspaper," Grace said, "and you, I do not want to neglect anything." "You would not be neglecting anything," Ryan said firmly. "Your assistant can handle the newspaper for a few months. The children and I can manage the house. Grace, you have spent the last 13 years putting everyone else first. It is time to do something for yourself." So Grace wrote the book. She worked on it in the early mornings before anyone else was awake and in the evenings after dinner. She wrote about coming to Rico with her father, about his death and her grief. She wrote about Marcus Weatherby and the duel, and about Ryan stepping forward to defend her honor. She wrote about their courtship and marriage, about building a life together in the Wild West. The book was published in 1896 under the title A Woman's Voice: Life and Love in the Colorado Mining Towns. It was a modest success, selling well enough that the publisher asked for a second book. Grace was approached by several women's rights organizations to speak at events. They wanted to hear about her experience as a female journalist in the West, about how she had stood up to men like Horace Blackwell and Marcus Weatherby. She gave a few speeches, traveling to Denver and Santa Fe and even once to San Francisco. Ryan accompanied her when he could, proud of his wife's accomplishments, but Grace always came home to Rico. For all the opportunities that might exist elsewhere, this dusty mountain town was where her heart lived. Thomas went off to college in Denver in 1897, studying journalism at a new university there. He wrote letters home full of enthusiasm for his classes and his new friends. Grace missed him terribly, but she was proud of the man he was becoming. Rose announced that she wanted to study art, and Grace and Ryan scraped together the money to send her to an art school in Santa Fe. Daniel, practical and sensible, decided he wanted to study engineering and began working with the mine engineers to learn the trade. The house felt empty with the children gone, but Grace and Ryan rediscovered the joy of being just a couple again. They took long walks in the mountains, went on picnics by the river, and spent quiet evenings reading together by the fire. "Do you ever regret it?" Grace asked one evening as they sat on their porch watching the sunset. "Staying here. You could have gone to California like you planned. You could have had a different life." "Never," Ryan said firmly. He took her hand and squeezed it. "This is exactly the life I wanted. You are exactly who I wanted to spend my life with. I would not change a single thing. Not even the part where you almost got shot defending my honor." Grace teased. "Especially not that part," Ryan said. He pulled her close and kissed her temple. "That was the day my real life began. In 1900, Thomas graduated from college and got a job at a major newspaper in Denver. He met a schoolteacher named Elizabeth, and they were married in a ceremony in Denver that Grace and Ryan attended with tears of joy. Rose finished art school and moved back to Rico, where she opened a small gallery and taught art classes to local children. She had inherited her mother's independent spirit and showed no interest in settling down anytime soon. Daniel completed his engineering training and was hired by the Silver Bell mine, working alongside his father. He was serious and dedicated, and the mine owners predicted he would go far. Grace, now in her early 40s, found herself thinking about the future. The newspaper was established and successful, with a staff of 3 assistants handling most of the daily operations. Her book had been well received, and she had published a second one about women's suffrage in the West. Ryan, approaching 50, had slowed down a bit. His hair was streaked with gray, and he complained sometimes about his knees hurting in cold weather. But he was still strong, still the man who had stood beside her in the street all those years ago and offered to fight for her honor. "I have been thinking," Grace said one night as they got ready for bed. "Maybe it is time to step back a little, let the younger people take over more." "Are you thinking about selling the newspaper?" Ryan asked, surprised. "No," Grace said, "but maybe promoting my senior assistant to editor. I could still write articles and oversee things, but let someone else handle the day-to-day stress. And you have been talking about retiring from the mine." "I have," Ryan admitted. "My knees are not what they used to be, and I am tired of working underground. I thought maybe I could do some consulting work, help other mines improve their safety practices." "That sounds perfect," Grace said. She sat down on the bed and looked at him. "We have built a good life here, Ryan. We have raised good children, done work that mattered, been part of this community. I am proud of what we have accomplished." "Me too," Ryan said. He sat beside her and took her hand. "And I am looking forward to whatever comes next. As long as I am with you, I am happy." They made the changes gradually over the next year. Grace promoted her assistant and stepped back to a more advisory role at the newspaper. Ryan retired from the mine and set up a small consulting business, traveling occasionally to other mining towns to advise on safety improvements. Thomas and Elizabeth had their first child in 1901, a daughter named Grace, after her grandmother. Grace and Ryan traveled to Denver to meet their first grandchild, and Grace cried happy tears as she held the tiny baby. Rose surprised everyone by announcing her engagement in 1902 to a rancher from outside Rico. His name was John Walker, and he was steady and kind and clearly adored Rose. They were married that summer in a lovely outdoor ceremony, with Rose wearing a dress she had designed herself. Daniel, ever practical, married a sensible young woman named Sarah in 1903. She was a teacher at the Rico school, and she and Daniel were well matched in their serious, thoughtful natures. As their children built their own families, Grace and Ryan settled into a comfortable retirement. They traveled some, visiting their children and grandchildren. They spent time on projects they had never had time for before. Ryan learned to build furniture, and Grace wrote her third book, a novel this time instead of non-fiction. The town of Rico continued to change around them. The mines played out eventually, as everyone knew they would. Some people moved away, but many stayed, finding new ways to make a living. Rico transformed from a mining town into a small mountain community, quieter than it had been but still vibrant and alive. Grace and Ryan watched these changes with interest, but not sadness. They had lived through Rico's most dramatic era, had been part of shaping the town into what it was. Now, it was time to let the next generation take over. In the spring of 1910, Grace and Ryan celebrated their 27th wedding anniversary. Their children threw them a party at the town hall, inviting everyone in Rico. It seemed like the whole town showed up. People gave speeches about Grace and Ryan's contributions to the community. Tom Henderson, now in his 80s and moving slowly, got up and told the story of that day in 1882 when Grace had challenged Marcus Weatherby to a duel. And then this young cowboy stepped forward, Tom said, gesturing to Ryan. And he said he would stand beside her, would fight for her honor. And that is what he has done every day since. He has stood beside her, supported her, loved her. They have built something beautiful together, and this town is better for it. There was loud applause, and Grace felt tears streaming down her face. She looked at Ryan and saw that he was crying too. "Thank you," Grace said when the applause died down. "Thank you all for being part of our lives, for welcoming us into this community and supporting us through everything. Rico is home, and you are family." That night, back in their comfortable house on the edge of town, Grace and Ryan sat on their porch and watched the stars come out over the mountains. 27 years, Grace said softly. "It feels like yesterday and forever ago at the same time." "I know what you mean," Ryan said. He had his arm around her shoulders, and she leaned into his warmth. "Do you remember what you were thinking that day when I offered to fight for you?" "I thought you were crazy," Grace admitted with a laugh. "I did not understand why a stranger would risk his life for someone he did not even know. I thought maybe you had ulterior motives." "I just could not stand by and watch you get hurt," Ryan said. "Something about you, even from that first moment, called to me. I had to help you." "I am glad you did," Grace said. "I am glad you stayed. I am glad you loved me." "Loving you has been the easiest thing I have ever done," Ryan said. He kissed the top of her head. "You made me believe in happy endings." They sat in comfortable silence for a while, listening to the night sounds. An owl hooted somewhere in the trees. The wind whispered through the pines. The creek that ran behind their property bubbled and sang. "I have been thinking about something," Grace said eventually. "About that day, about everything that has happened since, and I realized something important." "What is that?" Ryan asked. "When I challenged Marcus to that duel, I thought I was fighting for my honor, for my right to be respected and taken seriously. And I was. But I was also fighting for something bigger. I was fighting for the right to choose my own life, to not be defined by what men thought I could or could not do." "You won that fight," Ryan said. "I did," Grace agreed. "But I could not have won it alone. When you stepped forward and said you would fight for me, you were not taking away my agency or treating me like I was helpless. You were standing beside me, adding your strength to mine. You were showing me that I did not have to face everything alone." Ryan was quiet for a moment. "I never thought about it that way," he said. "I just wanted to help you." "I know," Grace said. She turned to look at him, this man who had changed her life so completely. His hair was more gray than dark now, and there were lines around his eyes and mouth. But he was still the same Ryan who had knelt in her office and offered to be her champion, still the same man who had stood in the street and faced down a killer without flinching. "I love you," Grace said. "I have loved you from almost the beginning, and I will love you until the day I die." "And I love you," Ryan said. "Always have, always will." They kissed, tender and sweet, a kiss that held 27 years of love and laughter and struggles overcome together. The years that followed were peaceful and happy. Grace and Ryan's family continued to grow. Thomas and Elizabeth had 3 more children. Rose and John had twin boys. Daniel and Sarah had 2 daughters. Grace and Ryan became beloved grandparents, always ready with stories and cookies and gentle wisdom. Grace continued to write, publishing articles occasionally and working on her memoirs. Ryan stayed busy with his consulting work and his woodworking, creating beautiful furniture that their children and grandchildren treasured. They traveled when they could, visiting places they had always wanted to see. They went to San Francisco and saw the ocean. They visited Texas so Ryan could show Grace where he had grown up. They went to Washington, D.C., and Grace met with other women journalists who had read her books. But they always came back to Rico, to their home in the mountains where their life together had truly begun. In the summer of 1915, the town threw a celebration for Grace and Ryan's 32nd wedding anniversary. It was also, though no one said it directly, a celebration of their lives and their contributions to the community. Both of them were slowing down now, moving more carefully, their hair completely white and their faces deeply lined. The whole family gathered in Rico for the occasion. Thomas came from Denver with Elizabeth and their children. Rose and John came from their ranch with the twins, now rowdy teenagers. Daniel and Sarah were already there, since they still lived in town with their daughters. There were grandchildren running everywhere, laughing and playing. There were old friends telling stories and sharing memories. There was food and music and joy. Grace stood with Ryan's arm around her waist and looked at everything they had built, everyone they had touched. This family, these friends, this community. All of it had started with a single moment of courage, with her standing in the street and refusing to be silenced, and with Ryan stepping forward to stand beside her. "Are you happy?" Ryan asked softly, his lips close to her ear. "I am the happiest woman alive," Grace said. She turned to him and smiled. "Thank you for giving me this life. Thank you for standing beside me." "I will always stand beside you," Ryan said, "until the very end and beyond." "I know," Grace said. "I have always known." They stayed that way for a long moment, holding each other while their families celebrated around them. 2 people who had found each other against all odds, who had built a love that lasted, who had created something beautiful and lasting out of courage and trust and hope. The sun was setting over the mountains, painting the sky in brilliant shades of orange and pink and purple. Grace looked at that western sky, the same sky she had seen on her first day in Rico all those years ago, and felt a deep sense of peace. This was home. This was love. This was the life she had chosen and fought for and cherished every single day, and it was enough. More than enough. It was everything. As the stars began to appear in the darkening sky, the party continued. Children chased fireflies. Adults told stories and laughed. Music played. And in the middle of it all, Grace and Ryan stood together, their hands clasped, their hearts full, their love as strong as it had been that first day when a cowboy had stepped forward and changed everything by simply saying, "I will stand beside you." Years continued to flow like the creek behind their house, steady and sure. Grace and Ryan grew older together with Grace, still holding hands on their evening walks, still finding reasons to laugh. Their children visited often, and their grandchildren brought endless joy with their energy and curiosity. Grace published her memoir in 1918, a comprehensive look at her life in Rico and her journey as a journalist and woman in the West. The book was widely praised and was even used in some colleges as a text about women's history. She received letters from women across the country telling her that her story had inspired them to pursue their own dreams. Ryan's consulting work eventually wound down as he approached his 70s, but he never stopped being active in the community. He served on various committees and helped younger men learn skills and trades. He built a workshop behind their house where he spent hours creating beautiful pieces of furniture, each one a labor of love. In 1920, women finally won the right to vote with the passage of the 19th Amendment. Grace, now 60 years old, cast her first vote in a national election that November with tears streaming down her face. Ryan stood beside her at the polling place, squeezing her hand as she filled out her ballot. "Your father would be so proud," Ryan whispered. "All your fighting, all your writing, all your work, it mattered." "We did it together," Grace reminded him. "I could never have kept going without you." Their love story became something of a legend in Rico. Young couples would ask them for advice, wanting to know the secret to such a long and happy marriage. Grace and Ryan's answer was always the same: trust, respect, and choosing each other every single day, even when things were difficult. "Love is not just a feeling," Grace would say. "It is a choice you make over and over. It is standing beside each other through everything life throws at you." "It is being partners," Ryan would add. "Equal partners who support each other's dreams and lift each other up." Thomas became a successful journalist in Denver, eventually rising to editor of a major newspaper. Elizabeth was a beloved teacher who influenced hundreds of students. Their children grew up to be doctors and teachers and artists. Rose's art gained recognition beyond Rico. Her paintings of the Colorado mountains were displayed in galleries in Denver and Santa Fe. She and John raised their twin boys on the ranch, teaching them to love the land and respect the work. Daniel became the chief engineer at the Silver Bell mine, implementing safety practices that saved countless lives. He and Sarah were pillars of the community, always ready to help neighbors in need. Their daughters both became teachers like their mother. Grace and Ryan watched all of this with pride and satisfaction. They had raised good children who were raising good children in turn. Their legacy would continue long after they were gone. In the spring of 1925, Grace and Ryan celebrated their 42nd wedding anniversary. It was a quiet celebration, just family at their house. Grace was 65 now and Ryan was 68. They moved more slowly than they once had, and both dealt with various aches and pains. But their minds were still sharp and their love was still strong. 42 years, Ryan said as they sat together on their porch that evening watching the sunset. "We have been married for 42 years. It feels impossible. We were so young when we met," Grace said. "I was 22 and thought I knew everything." "You were 25 and so calm and sure of yourself." "I was not that sure," Ryan admitted with a chuckle. "I was terrified when I offered to fight for you. I had no idea if I would survive that duel." "But you did it anyway," Grace said. "You stood beside me and said, 'I am next.' You changed my whole life with those words." "You changed mine too," Ryan said. He brought her hand to his lips and kissed it gently. "You gave me a home and a purpose and a reason to be better than I thought I could be." They sat in comfortable silence, watching the mountains turn purple in the fading light. After 42 years of marriage, they did not always need words. Sometimes just being together was enough. The seasons continued their eternal cycle. Summer gave way to fall, fall to winter, winter to spring. Grace and Ryan lived through each season together, adapting to the changes that age brought but never losing the essential connection between them. In the winter of 1927, Ryan caught pneumonia. Grace nursed him through it with fierce determination, refusing to let him give up. She sat by his bedside day and night, reading to him and holding his hand and reminding him that she needed him to stay with her. "I am not ready to let you go," she told him one night when his fever was high and he seemed to be drifting away. "We still have more life to live together. More sunsets to watch, more grandchildren to meet. You have to fight, Ryan. You have to stay with me." Whether it was her words or sheer stubbornness or just not being his time yet, Ryan recovered. By spring, he was back on his feet, though he moved more carefully and tired more easily. "You saved my life," he told Grace. "Again, just like you have been saving me every day since we met." "We save each other," Grace said. "That is what love is." Their youngest grandchild was born in 1928, a girl named Grace Ryan after both her grandparents. When they held her for the first time, both of them cried happy tears. The baby had Grace's hazel eyes and Ryan's dark hair, a perfect blend of them both. "Our legacy," Ryan whispered, looking at the tiny face. "She will grow up hearing stories about us. About the woman who challenged a man to a duel and the cowboy who stood beside her." "I hope she grows up brave," Grace said. "I hope she knows she can be anything she wants to be." "She will," Ryan said confidently. "Look at the family she is being born into. Strong women and good men who respect them. She could not ask for better." The years grew shorter as Grace and Ryan entered their 70s. They spent most of their time at home now, surrounded by family and friends. Their house was always full of visitors, grandchildren running through the rooms, the smell of fresh baked bread and brewing coffee. Grace still wrote occasionally, though her hands were gnarled with arthritis and typing was difficult. She dictated some of her stories to her granddaughters, who carefully wrote down her words. She wanted to preserve the history of Rico and the early days, wanted future generations to know what life had been like. Ryan spent his days in his workshop, moving slowly but still creating beautiful things. Each piece of furniture he made was given to a family member with love and blessing. He wanted to leave something tangible behind, something that would last. In the summer of 1932, the whole family gathered in Rico for a massive reunion. It had been years since everyone had been together in one place. Children who had moved away for work or school came home. Grandchildren brought their friends. The house overflowed with people and noise and love. Grace, now 72, sat in a comfortable chair on the porch and watched the chaos with deep contentment. Ryan, 75 and moving with a cane, sat beside her holding her hand. "We did good," he said, his voice rough with age and emotion. "Look at all of this, all these people. All this love. We built this." "We did," Grace agreed. "From one moment of courage, from you standing beside me when you had no reason to, we built all of this." Thomas came over with his youngest son, a boy of 12 who was fascinated by history. "Grandma, Grandpa, will you tell the story again?" About the duel, Grace and Ryan exchanged glances and smiled. They had told this story 100 times, but it never got old. "Well," Grace began, "it was the summer of 1882, and I was a young woman running a newspaper in Rico. A man named Marcus Weatherby assaulted me, and I challenged him to a duel. She was the bravest woman I had ever seen," Ryan continued, "standing in the middle of Main Street with a smoking gun, demanding justice. I knew right then I had to help her." "He came to my office and offered to be my champion," Grace said. "He said he would fight Marcus for me. I was so scared and so grateful." "I was scared too," Ryan admitted, "but I could not let her face that danger alone, so I stood in the street at high noon and I faced Marcus Weatherby." "And you shot him," the boy said excitedly. "You won the duel." "I did," Ryan said. "But the real victory was not in the shooting. It was in showing Grace that she did not have to face the world's cruelty alone. It was in standing beside her and saying, "I am next. I will fight for you." "And we have been fighting together ever since," Grace said, squeezing Ryan's hand. "Through all the joys and sorrows, the triumphs and struggles, always together, always standing beside each other." The boy listened with wide eyes, then ran off to tell his cousins the story. Grace watched him go with a smile. "They will remember," she said softly. "Long after we are gone, they will remember our story and tell it to their children." "Good," Ryan said. "I want them to know that love like ours is possible. That you can find your person and build a life together and be happy. I want them to know that courage and honor and standing up for what is right still matter." As the sun set that evening, the family gathered for a big outdoor dinner. Tables were set up in the yard, covered with food that everyone had brought to share. Children ran and played. Adults talked and laughed. Music played from someone's radio. Grace and Ryan sat at the head of the main table, watching over their family like the patriarch and matriarch they had become. Every person there was connected to them, was part of the legacy they had built together. After dinner, Rose stood up and raised her glass. "I want to make a toast," she said, her voice carrying across the yard. Everyone quieted down to listen. "To my parents," Rose said, looking at Grace and Ryan with tears in her eyes. "To two people who showed all of us what real love looks like. Who taught us to be brave, to stand up for what is right, to support each other through everything. You have given us the greatest gift parents can give their children. You have shown us how to love well." To Grace and Ryan, everyone chorused, raising their glasses. Grace felt tears running down her face, but she was smiling. Ryan's arm was around her shoulders, strong and steady as it had been for 50 years. "Thank you," Grace said, her voice shaky with emotion. "Thank you all for being here, for being part of our lives. We love you all so much." The party continued late into the night. Eventually the children went to bed, and then the adults began drifting off to the various rooms and hotels where they were staying. Grace and Ryan were finally alone on their porch, looking up at the stars. "That was perfect," Grace said. "One of the best days of my life." "Mine too," Ryan agreed. He pulled her closer. "Grace, I need to tell you something." She heard the seriousness in his tone and looked up at him. "What is it?" "I have been thinking about the future," Ryan said slowly. "About what comes next. I am 75 years old and I am tired. My body is wearing out. I do not know how much longer I have." "Do not talk like that," Grace said, fear clutching at her heart. "We have to talk about it," Ryan said gently. "We both know we are not going to live forever. And I need you to know that whatever time I have left, however long or short, I am grateful for every moment. You have given me the most wonderful life, Grace. I have no regrets." "Neither do I," Grace whispered. "Except that I wish we could have more time. 1,000 more years would not be enough." "Then we will have to make the most of whatever time we have," Ryan said. He kissed her forehead. "I love you, Grace Vance Porter. I have loved you since the day I met you, and I will love you for all eternity." "I love you too," Grace said. "Always and forever." They sat together under the stars, holding each other close, treasuring each moment they had been given together. Ryan lived for 3 more years. They were good years, filled with quiet joy and the presence of family. He and Grace spent their days together, talking and reading and simply being in each other's company. They took short walks when the weather was good. They sat on their porch and watched the mountains change with the seasons. In the spring of 1935, Ryan's heart began to fail. The doctor said there was nothing to be done. He was 78 years old and had lived a long, full life. Now it was time to let go. Grace refused to accept it at first. She had saved him from pneumonia before. Surely she could save him again. But Ryan was at peace with what was coming. "Grace," he said one afternoon as they sat together in their bedroom, the spring sunshine streaming through the windows. "I need you to promise me something." "Anything," Grace said, holding his hand tightly. "When I am gone, I need you to keep living," Ryan said. "Do not shut yourself away. Keep writing, keep being part of this community, keep seeing our family. You have too much to give to let grief stop you." "I do not know how to live without you," Grace said, tears streaming down her face. "You have been beside me for more than 50 years. How do I do this alone?" "You are the strongest person I know," Ryan said. "You challenged a man to a duel for your honor. You built a newspaper and raised a family and changed this whole town. You can do anything, Grace. And you will not be alone. You have children and grandchildren and great-grandchildren who love you. You have friends and a community, and you will have your memories of us, of everything we built together." "It is not enough," Grace sobbed. "I need you." "I will always be with you," Ryan promised. "In every sunset over the mountains, in every story you tell about the old days. In the faces of our grandchildren. I will be there, Grace. Always." Ryan Porter died on a beautiful May morning in 1935, with Grace holding his hand and all their children gathered around his bed. His last words were, "I love you," spoken to Grace with the last of his strength. Grace felt like her heart had been torn out. The world seemed gray and empty without Ryan in it. But she remembered her promise to him, and she forced herself to keep going. The funeral was attended by the entire town of Rico and people from all over Colorado. Ryan had touched so many lives, had helped so many people. Story after story was told about his kindness, his integrity, his courage. Grace stood at the graveside and watched as they lowered Ryan's coffin into the ground. She thought about that day 53 years ago when he had stepped forward to defend her honor, when he had changed the course of both their lives. She thought about every moment they had shared since then, every laugh and tear and kiss and conversation. "Thank you," she whispered as the first shovelful of earth fell on the coffin. "Thank you for standing beside me. Thank you for loving me. Thank you for everything." The months after Ryan's death were difficult. Grace moved through them in a haze of grief, going through the motions of living but not really feeling alive. Her family surrounded her with love and support, making sure she ate and slept and did not spend too much time alone. Slowly, gradually, Grace began to find her way back to life. She started writing again, beginning a new project about Ryan and their life together. She wanted to preserve every memory, every detail, wanted future generations to know what an extraordinary man he had been. She spent time with her grandchildren and great-grandchildren, telling them stories about their grandfather. She wanted them to know Ryan as she had known him, brave and kind and funny and strong. She volunteered at the library and the school, sharing her love of books and learning with children. She attended town council meetings and continued to advocate for the issues she cared about. Grace lived for 10 more years after Ryan's death. They were not easy years, and she never stopped missing him, but they were good years nonetheless. She published her book about their life together, and it became her most successful work. She saw more grandchildren born and watched the older ones start families of their own. She remained in their house on the edge of Rico, surrounded by Ryan's furniture and their shared memories. On warm evenings, she would sit on the porch and talk to Ryan as if he were still beside her, telling him about her day and about the family, and about the town they had both loved. In the summer of 1945, Grace Vance Porter died peacefully in her sleep at the age of 85. She was buried next to Ryan in the Rico Cemetery, their headstones side by side just as they had been side by side in life. Her funeral was as well attended as Ryan's had been. Their children, now elderly themselves, stood at the graveside and wept for the loss of their remarkable mother. Their grandchildren and great-grandchildren filled the cemetery, 3 generations who existed because a woman had stood up for her honor and a cowboy had stood beside her. Thomas, now in his 60s, gave the eulogy. "My mother was extraordinary," he said, his voice thick with emotion. "She faced down bullies and corruption. She built a newspaper that changed this town. She raised 3 children and loved them fiercely, but her greatest accomplishment was her love story with my father." He paused, looking at the 2 headstones. "They showed all of us what real love looks like. Not the easy, romantic love of fairy tales, but the hard, daily choice to stand beside someone through everything, to support each other's dreams, to lift each other up, to fight together against whatever the world threw at them. They met because my mother was brave enough to demand justice, and my father was brave enough to stand beside her and say, 'I am next.' And from that single moment of courage, they built a lifetime of love. They built this family. They left us a legacy of strength and integrity and devotion that will last for generations." "Thank you, Mom," Thomas said, his voice breaking. "Thank you for everything. Thank you for showing us how to live with courage and love with our whole hearts. Thank you for the example you and Dad gave us. We will carry your story forward, and we will make sure that no one ever forgets the woman who challenged a man to a duel and the cowboy who stood beside her." As the mourners filed past the graves, each placing a flower or saying a quiet goodbye, the sun began to set over the mountains. The sky turned brilliant shades of orange and pink and purple, just as it had on that evening 53 years ago when Grace and Ryan had celebrated their 10th anniversary and reaffirmed their love for each other. And if you listened carefully, in the whisper of the wind through the pines and the bubble of the creek behind their house, you could almost hear 2 voices, joined together in eternal harmony, still standing beside each other, still loving each other, still together as they always had been and always would be. Their story became legend in Rico and beyond. Books were written about them. Historians studied Grace's newspapers and writings. Their house was eventually turned into a museum, preserving the legacy of 2 remarkable people who had helped shape the American West. And every year on the anniversary of that fateful day in 1882, people gathered in Rico to remember the woman who had the courage to stand up for herself, and the cowboy who had the courage to stand beside her, and to celebrate the incredible love story that had grown from that single moment of bravery. Their love had conquered time, had built a legacy that would never be forgotten, had proven that true courage is not facing danger alone, but having the wisdom to accept help when it is offered, and the strength to stand together against whatever comes. Grace and Ryan Porter's story lived on, inspiring generation after generation to be brave, to stand up for what is right, to love with their whole hearts, and to remember that the greatest adventures in life begin when 2 people choose to stand beside each other and face the world together.